Welcome to a Sunny Side Up Life podcast, a show for the woman who is ready to live an abundant life full of freedom and positivity. I'm your host, Sami Womack, a nationally recognized money expert, budgeting coach, and your very own hype squad. I'm on a mission to help you break free from survival mode, gain financial freedom, stay motivated, and focus on what matters most. Join the movement and let's start living on the brighter side of life together.
Just a reminder that everything discussed in today's episode will be linked in the show notes. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads at A Sunny Side Up Life. If you're ready to take control of your money and need guided instructions, check out my free budgeting challenge by going to asunnysideuplife.com. Now, let's get into the episode.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode. Today we are going to be talking about how to inflation-proof your money. Before we dive into all of that, I have to acknowledge today is the last episode of this season. I'm going to be taking a break for the summer. And I'll be really honest with you, I am ready for a break. It is so much work to put out a podcast. It's so much more than just sitting down and hitting record. Getting all of the notes ready, the outlines, doing the research, the social media posts, the editing, the graphics, all the things that go into doing a podcast, the show notes. There is so much. So first of all, I have to shout out my team behind the scenes. Without them, I would not be able to continue to do this podcast because, like I said, it is so much work. So shout out to them. Shout out to Weird Digital Marketing for doing all of the amazing things that they do, helping me keep putting out all of this free content for you guys and helping me share my message. I love you guys so much. And also shout out to you guys for continuing to listen. I had a call yesterday with a potential new client. And she was telling me that she's listened to the podcast for several years. And she was telling me how much she enjoys it and how much she's learned from it. And it just really blows my mind every single time. I mean, I see the numbers and I see the downloads, but it's still just, I feel like I just started. I feel like the podcast is still new because I get so excited every time someone tells me that they listen. So it still makes me happy. It still brings me so much joy. And just the fact that you guys actually want to be here is amazing. And I definitely don't take it for granted, even after all of these years. My favorite joke to my family's favorite joke is that I talk too much. I love to talk. I always have. And now I get to say, well, that's why I have a podcast. So anyways, I am very grateful to all of you for tuning in. Don't worry, after I take a little bit of a break for the summer, we will be back. And if you are kind of finding yourself missing the podcast, there are so many old episodes to listen to. I think we are probably nearing 200, more than 200, something like that. There are so many episodes, and I still have people going back several years to listen to the old episodes and finding value from them. So if you find yourself missing the podcast over the summer, go back and listen to some of the older episodes that maybe you weren't here for yet, because I promise you, there is still so much value in them. So I am going to leave you with some actionable tips for dealing with inflation, and we'll get to that in a minute. So make sure to stay tuned till the end of the episode. So why are we talking about this topic? All right. So you hear about inflation in the news and on social media. And at this point, I think most of us are like, yep, we know, we're seeing it, right? If you're like most Americans, you're feeling it in your wallet. I know all of my clients are as well. Our grocery budgets are not stretching as far as they used to. Housing prices are crazy, and a lot of people aren't getting raises at all, or if they are, it's not meeting inflation, right? And we are still seeing this. And I feel like we're still, 4 years post-COVID, which is crazy to me that it's been that long, but we feel like inflation is still high. So we're going to talk about how to ease some of the inflation in our own lives in just a little bit. So, what exactly is inflation and who controls it? So, according to Yahoo Finance, and make sure to check the show notes if you want to read more about these sources where we do all this research for you guys to make sure that you have well researched episodes. And we're going to link all of the sources in the show notes for you guys if you want to read more about where we are getting this information and do more of, reading it for yourself. But according to Yahoo Finance, inflation measures the price of increase of goods and services over a set period of time, usually a year. If inflation is high, that means the price of goods and services is growing quickly. If inflation is low, that means the prices are growing slowly. So we're seeing big changes in, say, prices of groceries over the past 4 years. They're growing at a faster rate than average, which means that inflation is high. The inflation rate typically measures the overall change in price for a broad group of goods and services like groceries, healthcare, utilities. This is something else that my clients have seen a lot is electricity prices going up. It started several months ago with my West Coast clients, then my East Coast clients, and then everyone else in the middle has started to kind of feel the pinch with electricity prices going up. Also, insurance prices have gone up, vehicle and home insurance. I know ours has. Our property taxes have went up. So we're feeling it all over the board. Economists measure this with different price index, most commonly called the Consumer Price Index or CPI. Inflation is essentially your purchasing power. So over time, prices go up and you can't buy as much with your dollars as you could, say, a year ago, or, talking about post-COVID as we could 5 years ago, right? So, for example, you might have noticed that 3 years ago, maybe you could spend $100 or $200 for a week's worth of groceries. And now you're feeling like that same amount of money is only getting you maybe 75% of what it used to get you. So that's kind of where we are as well. For us, we're a family of 5 and we have a dog and a cat and we're home a lot. So we are eating almost every single meal at home. And there was a time, I would say, before COVID, of course, our kids have gotten bigger too. So that probably has a little bit to do with it as well. But we were spending, I would say, maybe 150, 200 on a week's worth of groceries. We would kind of do maybe like a fill-in week where we just get kind of a few things that we were out of. Maybe we could get away with 100. Now it's more of like a normal full week of groceries is more like 300, kind of fill in the gaps is like 200. It's very rare for me to do a Walmart pickup order and it be under $200. Even just going in, just running into the store to get, just say the things that we just need for dinner real quick is going to be like $50 to $80. So we're seeing the pinch. We're feeling the pinch everywhere. So you're definitely not alone if you're just like, why can I not get this food budget down? So that's something that I have to continually keep reminding my clients is like, remember, like it's not $100 is not the same as it was 4 years ago, 3 years ago, right? So don't beat yourself up too bad on that. And we'll talk about some things that you can do. So you may have been asking yourself, okay, I get inflation, but where does the Fed come in? So a lot of times, especially if you're like watching the news or you're following a lot of financial influencers, you'll hear the term the Fed. So what does that mean? So that means the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve has targeted an annual inflation rate of 2%. So that's kind of like when we're calculating retirement numbers, we usually will plan in a 2% inflation rate. So obviously, if you're planning to retire and you have $1 million right now, in 20 years, $1 million is not going to buy you what it buys you right now. So part of figuring in your retirement numbers, for example, we have to figure in inflation. And that's where some people kind of slip up if they aren't calculating their retirement numbers properly. So that's where some people will kind of say, okay, well, if my retirement my investments are bringing me like 8%. That's where you can kind of go and say, well, okay, well, let me just figure them at 6% to kind of take in a little bit of account for inflation. And there's different people use different tactics to kind of calculate this. In The Simple Path to Wealth, that's one of my favorite beginning investing books. So that's The Simple Path to Wealth. You can look that up on Amazon and buy yourself like a paperback copy. It is well worth having it in your collection. And I would recommend treating it like a textbook, like highlight, take notes, scribble all over it, and keep it because it is so, so helpful. But anyway, in that book, he talks about calculating your retirement and planning for inflation in that. But I digress. So the Fed is considering an average inflation rate of 2%. However, right now, lately, you might have seen we are above average, right? So I wanted to bring up this page real quick. It's the Consumer Price Index summary to read you this for sure. What this says is that all items index has rose 3.4% for 12 months ending in April. So we are seeing still above average for inflation. What the Fed does, the Federal Reserve responds by raising its benchmark federal rates. This effectively limits the money supply available for purchases of riskier assets. So what the government tries to do is they try to help balance out inflation because they don't want the stock market to do what it did in the Great Depression, right? So they kind of get their hands in there and they mess around with interest rates and all sorts of things. And they kind of try to balance things out. So what they do is they increase the borrowing cost, they raise interest rates, they discourage consumer and business spending, especially on commonly financed big ticket items like housing and capital equipment. So interest rates and inflation tend to move in the same direction, but with lags. So because policymakers require data to estimate future inflation trends and the interest rates that they set, it takes time to fully affect the economy, right? Because there's a delay and things get so tangled up in policy making and all the things that it takes a while for it to reach the average consumer. But higher rates may be needed to bring rising inflation under control while slowing economic growth. It often lowers the inflation rate and may prompt rate cuts. The Fed targets a range of the federal funds rate in part by setting the rate it pays on banking reserve balances. So we might see like treasury notes and CDs. And we even will see this in like our high yield savings accounts, right? Where if you bank with Ally, you might have noticed since COVID that their returns have increased. So when COVID first happened, the rates were, gosh, I don't even know, around maybe 2%, 3% is what you were getting on a return from Ally. Well, COVID, and of course, the whole stock market tanked and the airlines tanked and all this stuff happened. And if you look at my net worth chart, you'll see this huge, huge dip where our net worth took like a $40,000 hit in a matter of couple of days. It was a little scary, but at this time, because the stock market and all the banks and stuff were trying to self-correct and trying to balance out the economy, and the Fed put its hands in it and everything that it does. Ally's interest, the interest earned on the accounts went to like 0.5%. But since COVID, they have gradually grown, and now they're over 4% return. So we'll see things like this reflected. We'll see treasury notes not have as great of a return. We'll see CDs not have as great of a return. But on the flip side of that, we'll see interest rates with our houses, cars, things like that, credit cards being even higher. So with housing, I recently heard from a friend who was trying to buy a house that the bank was telling her about 7 to 8% interest. Let me know on Instagram, like if you are in the market for a house right now, what kind of interest rate you have been quoted lately. But that's kind of what I have seen personally. And I have seen with my coaching clients, I've seen credit cards recently being in the 20s and even low 30% interest rates. So this is all a direct reflection of inflation. And this is how we see it kind of showing up in our average everyday life. So now that we know what inflation is and who attempts to manage it, we can talk about how it impacts you and how to create more of an inflation-proof financial life. So inflation makes things cost more money, right? Which wouldn't be as big of an issue if, like I said, wages kept up with the rate of inflation. And so you might see people talking about a COL or cost of living raise. And this is pretty standard, especially if you have a union job. The union will usually fight for you to get a cost of living raise, or maybe you just happen to work for a great company and every year you get a cost of living raise. Usually with my husband's company, they are under a union. And so almost every year we get like a 3 to 5% cost of living raise, which has been really great. There have been a couple of years where they were in disagreements with the union and where we didn't get those. But overall, we usually get like an average of a 4% raise, which is pretty standard. And we're pretty grateful for that, even though, of course, we do have to pay union dues, but that's kind of part of it. So, but of course, that is not average. And that's not what's happening in a lot of people's lives. Like teachers, for example, especially with my clients, I've seen that not showing up as much. Like not everyone is getting a cost of living raise. And that might be you as well. So you might know what I'm talking about, which leaves the middle class, the working class struggling to make ends meet. So, of course, we've seen this with food. We've seen this with housing. Not only are the houses themselves going up in value, the interest rates are going up, which means we're paying more monthly for our loans. Property taxes have went up. Insurance has went up. Our mortgage alone, even though we have a fixed rate on our interest rate has not increased, but our mortgage itself this year increased $200 per month because our property taxes and our insurance both went up. So if you are living paycheck to paycheck, you're living a really already a tight budget, $200 a month is a pretty significant difference. Then add in groceries are higher, gas is higher, maybe your electricity is higher, and a lot of people just had their student loans kicking back in. So we're feeling the pinch all the way around as average middle class Americans, right? So what are some of the factors that are attributing to this? One of the things is greedflation. And the other thing is shrinkflation, which we'll talk about. Greedflation, this is one of those things, capitalism. It's so great, right? So we're going to link to a YouTube video that was pretty fascinating talking about this. It was recorded, I think, back in 2021, 22, but the facts are still the facts. So things like greedflation, what this is that our market has become not as competitive as it once was because these big conglomerate companies are owning our products. So for example, there are two major companies that have cornered the market on things like diapers and toilet paper, which we've seen those increase in price, right? There are two major companies, P&G and Kimberly-Clark. So what happens is one of them will raise their price. So the other one's like, hey, they're getting away with it. We'll raise our price too. And then what are you going to do? Not buy toilet paper? Not buy diapers? I mean, there are reusable options. Some people are going to those options. Some people are, buying the cheapest brands possible. But irregardless, you're either buying from one of the two major companies usually. This, again, is like four major companies have the meat market in America. So there's just not a lot of competition, basically. But one of the other statistics that this video was talking about was in April of 2021, Pepsi raised their price. And when they raised their price, of course, they always come out and they blame, well, the products have gone up in value. Well, everyone was complaining about minimum wage, so we had to raise our labor went up, right? We had to raise everyone's wages. So they increased the price of Pepsi, which basically makes the raises that you just gave your employees basically zero out, because now they're spending more on groceries, they're making more, but it doesn't make any difference, which is just ridiculous. But Pepsi raised their price. They blamed the higher cost of products, the higher labor, and then reported a $3 billion profit just in the second quarter of 2021 alone. That's just one quarter. So if you were to average that out, they're profiting $12 billion on average, going by those statistics. So did they really need to raise their prices, or was that just an excuse? Like, were they just being greedy? Was it just greedflation? So of course, Coca-Cola is going to raise their prices as well, because they're like, well, Pepsi's getting away with it. We might as well too. And then they reported a 16% increase in profits. It's a lot of it is greedflation. So what if they were to lower their profits for their CEOs, for their company, for their stockholders, which, of course, we want to be players in the stock market. We want our stocks to go up. But come on, like the average person, even if you are a stock owner, we're not seeing the results of these. Like, we're not getting the money back in our pockets at the rate that we really should. The other thing is shrinkflation. So this is basically like them selling you a smaller bag of chips for the same price, right? And I've seen tons and tons of reels and TikToks of people talking about this. And it's pretty interesting if you want to go down that rabbit hole of looking at shrinkflation. And basically like the chips, they're putting them in the same size bag. But if you look at the weight is smaller, things like that. I saw this one the other day. I don't know if it was a hoax or if it was real, but this person was, I think, in like Walmart or some grocery store, and they were looking at where the package of chicken says the weight, and then they were actually weighing it, and it was like nowhere close, but they were charging you like per pound. I don't know how much of that was legit. There were people in the comments saying that that wasn't real or water weight or whatever, but I don't know. There's a lot of stuff going on. So it's interesting. Maybe that's another rabbit hole you might want to go down. And I don't know if that's a full-on conspiracy theory or what is going on, but yeah. So this may be the new normal. Experts are saying it's not going to go down because people are willing to pay. And there is just not a lot of competition. So you can say all day, like, well, Pepsi has Coca-Cola. That's it, really. I mean, there are some other smaller companies, but they call the shots when it comes down to it. There's also huge companies like Kellogg's. And you might remember a couple of months ago when the CEO of Kellogg's came out and said, eat cereal for dinner. Like, if your groceries are so expensive, well, just eat cereal for dinner. Which, don't get me wrong, I love a good bowl of cereal, especially at bedtime. Like, I'd rather have a big bowl of cereal than a bowl of ice cream. That's just me. But because I want to, not because that's the only thing I can afford, not because I can't afford to have protein in my dinner or fresh vegetables in my dinner. Like, that's not the reason why I want to eat cereal for dinner. It's just greed all the way around. The other thing about experts are saying that it's not going to go down because we're willing to pay. I think about that. My husband and I get on these rants a lot about vehicle manufacturers. I bought my Yukon back in the summer, and I bought it used. I always forget the year. I think it's a 2018. I can't remember. It's somewhere in there. I always forget the year model that it is, but it's a few years old. It has over 100,000 miles, but we bought it in cash. We've been buying our vehicles in cash for several years now. But about a month ago, I had to replace the transmission. The transmissions are just not lasting past 150,000 miles anymore. And it gets to the point where it just has to be disposable. It's not even something that you can fix, because that's one of the first things I asked the mechanic, like, is it something that we can just repair? No, we have to replace the entire transmission. So the original transmission gets thrown away after it's like 6 years old, like 150,000 miles. That's it. That's all you get. And you throw it away and it goes somewhere into a landfill, or I don't know if they can recycle those parts or what. But how many vehicles are we doing this with? Vehicles are almost meant to be disposable at this point. They're meant for you to drive them for 3 to 5 years, and then that's it. This is ridiculous. So my husband and I get on these huge rants because we're very big proponents of cash flowing vehicles, buying things in cash, not having debt in your vehicles, and just fixing things as you go. And so we get in this whole rant of like, why is a basic SUV $100,000, like $80,000? This is ridiculous. This is the price of a house, but people are still paying it. So they're going to still charge it. Anyway, let me get off that soapbox because I could stay on that topic for an hour.
For the past 4 years, I've worked with over 100 clients one-on-one, real women who took action on making big changes to their finances. My coaching sessions are designed to give you completely personalized budgeting support. Together, we'll organize your bills, build better spending habits, pay down your debt, build your savings, and invest for the future. I'll help you get a system in place that will set you up for success for years to come. I'll answer all of your questions along the way, talk you through all of your mindset blocks, and most of all, I'll be there to hold you accountable. So this time will be the time that you'll finally stick to your budget and make those dreams a reality. Visit asunnysideuplife.com/coaching to apply today to see if one-on-one budget coaching is right for you.
So how do we manage inflation in our lives and inflation proof our money without having to eat cereal for dinner? All right, so we're going to go over 5 ways to inflation proof your money. So as we know, inflation rates are still up. We just kind of went through everything, groceries, of course, with travel, gas. I feel like for most of my clients and myself isn't terrible right now, but we'll probably see prices rise as we get farther into the summer. But one of the first things you can do is to build a solid emergency fund. And as I said, credit card interest rates have gotten higher and higher. And it is so crazy to me to see some of my clients paying upwards of 20% on interest of credit cards. If you really want a good punch in the stomach, a good just like, why? Go and look at your credit card bill and see how much you really are paying in interest. It is very painful, but a very good eye-opening experience. And of course, there are a lot of reasons why we get into credit card debt. Some of them are out of our control. I've had clients, that have gotten sick or been out of work or have gone through a nasty divorce, and basic living expenses get put on a credit card. I know it happens, but there are other times where there are things that we can control. And even if we have been through a rough season, maybe it's time to move past that season and not hang on to that credit card debt for any longer than we absolutely have to, and really break the cycle of depending on debt and depending on credit cards. So one of the best things you can do is start to build an emergency fund. And another thing you can do is build up your sinking funds. Sinking funds are things like, for example, say you want to spend $1,200 on Christmas. So you set aside $100 a month. Or you could set aside money every week or every 2 weeks, however often you want, for whatever total amount you want. You can do things like this for holidays, travel, clothing, your kids' activities, emergencies, medical expenses, your pets, hobbies, all kinds of things. that you can set up sinking funds for. And this is basically, think of it as you're sinking your money away little by little, so these larger expenses don't sneak up on you, basically. And this, along with an emergency fund, because this more or less is savings. It's savings. A sinking fund is like a hybrid between a spending account and a savings account. So you are saving up money, but it's something that you're planning to eventually spend that money at some point. Sometimes you just don't know when. Sometimes the amount varies, but you get the idea. So sinking funds and savings, this is basically just building up your defense against needing debt. Against, oh, I need new tires, or, oh, my dog needs a surgery, or my kid wants to go to this summer camp and it costs $2,000, oh, wow, Christmas was on December 25th again this year. What a surprise. So it is you building up a defense against needing a credit card, getting yourself in over your head and things, or things sneaking up on you, all of that. So this can look like sinking money away in a sinking fund, doing a set amount out of each paycheck or every month. Same thing with building up your emergency fund. One of my favorite tips for my clients is to automate their savings. So set aside $50 out of every paycheck, $200, whatever you can afford to set aside, and automate as much as you possibly can. Same thing with your sinking funds. Set up an automatic transfer and treat it kind of like a bill. Treat it like, every Thursday, this much money goes to my sinking fund. Or on the 15th of every month, this much money goes to my emergency fund, right? The more that you can automate, the better, because it's going to feel non-negotiable. And then you can use your own money to fund emergencies or cash flow vacations or holidays or things like that. And you won't have to make the credit card companies any richer than they already are. And you won't have to pay them 20 or 30%. You won't have to do Affirm next time you buy plane tickets or something like that. Okay. Sometimes I know things come up, and I go with this with my clients as well. Sometimes you already have a trip on the books and you're like, man, I've already committed to this trip. The rest of it's going to have to go on a credit card. That's happened, or an emergency comes up. I've had clients have to finance surgeries for, I had one client who had to finance a surgery for her dog. I've had people who had to finance their own dental work, different things like that. Like, I understand things happen, but we don't want to use this as a crutch, right? We don't want to rely on using debt to get through all of these things, because basically we have no control over whenever they decide to raise the interest rates and things like that. And that can be kind of scary. So tip number 2 is to save your money in a high yield savings account, which very well correlates with tip number 1. So instead of paying the credit cards 20% interest, what if we set our money aside in a savings account that paid us 4% interest? That's essentially what a high yield savings account is. So instead of a traditional savings account that you get at your local crusty bank that's going to try to pay you like 0.5%. In fact, the national average for a traditional savings account is actually 0.45%. So not even 0.5%. Ridiculous. I had a savings account at my local bank, my bank that I could just go down the corner and get money out of the ATM. And I was actually losing money because they were charging me excessive withdrawal fees. They were charging me a monthly charge. I was losing money. I was like, why do I even have this account? So all I have there now is my checking account, right? I don't even try to have a savings account there. So I personally have my savings account at Ally Bank. That's ALLY.com. Not sponsored. I wish I had a referral link. I have just used them for several years and been very happy with them. You can also Google and see what other high yield savings accounts there are. Capital One usually has a very competitive rate. SoFi usually has a competitive rate. There are several banks that will offer, around 4% is kind of the going rate right now. Ally, at the time of recording this, is at 4.2%, which is 5 times the national average. So instead of paying credit card companies money, taking out home equity loans, doing affirm payments, whatever it is, you could have this money over there actually earning you some money. And of course, it will take time to break the cycle of using debt. And it will take time to obviously get that debt paid off. And how do you balance paying your debt off and while simultaneously also saving for sinking funds, emergency funds, all that thing? It is hard to balance. And I'm not going to tell you that it's going to be this magical light switch that you can flip. And one day you're like, I break up with credit cards. I'm done. Cut them up with big scissors, all Dave Ramsey style. Or you could do like Daniel and I did. And Daniel literally blew them up with tannerite. If you know what tannerite is, it's an explosive. That's what we did with our credit cards. And we completely broke up with credit cards for about 7 years. Until recently, we have gotten to where I feel like we could travel hack and be responsible. And we're going on about 2 years of doing that and not paying interest on our credit cards. And it's been really great. And now the only debt we have is our home. So yeah, it does take a while. So like you can see, I've just told you. Our entire debt-free journey so far has been 10 years. We spent 7 years breaking up with credit cards, not adding to that debt, getting them paid off, chipping away, building our savings account. This is not an overnight process, but I promise that it is worth every step of the way. If you're feeling like you're getting pulled in multiple different directions of how do I pay off debt? Which debt do I pay off first? How do I do sinking funds? How do I build an emergency fund? How do I cash flow things as they come up? That's exactly what I do in one-on-one coaching. So if you're feeling like I just can't do this on my own, I need an outside perspective, that is exactly what I do every day in my one-on-one budget coaching service. So check out the show notes where you can learn how to apply for coaching, and I can help you figure out how to juggle these things, what order to put your goals in, and all the things like that. All right. Tip number 3, invest your money in long-term, low-cost index funds. Investing is the only true, tried and true, long-term, stable plan for building wealth. I think we talked about this maybe an episode or 2 ago about there are once in a million chances of people who win the lottery or their invention gets picked on Shark Tank. Those are 1 in a million. Okay. The average millionaire has happened in a very boring, long-term, slow way. It is average people. I'm not talking about wealthy billionaires, and I'm not talking about, the CEO of Kellogg's who has, basically told middle-class people to just starve for dinner. I'm not talking about people like that. I'm talking about your average millionaires who were electricians and teachers and who were average folks that became millionaires. This is how we are planning on doing this as well, right? Is investing in long-term, low-cost index funds. My favorite thing is to invest in total stock market index funds. What you can do is if you start your IRA, for example, if your income is that's 2023. Let me find the 2024 limits. I'm going to tell you for Roth IRAs. 2024. Okay, so the limits for investing in Roth IRAs, the income limits are $161,000 for single filers, $240,000 for married filing jointly. So if you're married and you file jointly and your income is under $240,000 per year, which is the average person, you can invest in a Roth IRA. You and your partner both can invest $7,000 tax-free per year. So $14,000 if you are a 2-person couple, right? If you are 50 or older, you can invest $8,000 per year. This is tax-free money if you're investing in a Roth IRA. What it does is it goes in and it lowers your taxable income. Okay. So you can do this. If your income is over the limit, you can simply invest in a traditional IRA. The tax implications are different, but it's still a great vehicle for investing. So you can do this even if you have a 401k through your work. You can do this if you have a 403b, a 457, whatever it is an individual retirement account. That's what an IRA stands for. So inside this IRA, this Roth IRA, preferably, you can invest up to $7,000 per spouse. So we're just going to go ahead and say $14,000, right? That's a lot of money. I don't know if you know this, but $14,000 is a lot of money. It's over $1,000 a month. That's not counting if you are investing straight out of your paycheck into a 401k, for example. Most people, this is going to be plenty of room to invest. You do not have to max it out. You can literally put $500, $1,000. Like, you do not have to max it out. That just gives you that much room to invest. Okay. So what you do is you open a Roth IRA at somewhere like Vanguard, Charles Schwab, Fidelity, someplace like that. You can literally do this online by yourself. You do not need a financial advisor. I mean, of course, if you want to learn more and you want some guidance, and of course, sure, you're going to pay higher fees, but that's okay. Like, you get what you pay for. But if you are just starting, you can literally do this yourself. If you have a preference, pick Vanguard, Charles Schwab, Fidelity. There's several other companies. Those are just the big names. And give it a Google. Fidelity, open a Roth IRA. Okay. With opening an IRA, it is a two-step process. The first step is transferring the money literally from your checking account into your IRA. Okay. And it kind of holds it there. It's like a savings account almost. You're going to make pennies, dollars. Like, you're not going to make very much. And a lot of people are like, well, I don't know. I had this IRA and it didn't do anything. That's because you have to take the second step. The second step is where you go and you select buy. You have to actually, or trade. Sometimes it's called trade. Sometimes it's called buy. You have to actually buy shares of stock. And this is where people are like, I'm out. This is scary. I don't know. Okay. So say you open your account with Fidelity. Again, give it a Google and say Fidelity Total Stock Market Index Fund. I'm going to do this right now because I cannot remember the code off the top of my head. Fidelity. Let's see. You guys are just going to go along with me here as I Google this Total Stock Market Index Fund. And I'm going to bring this up. And the code on that one is FSKAX. Okay, that is literally just Fidelity Total Stock Market Index Fund. You can Google this for yourself. If you have an account at Vanguard, Charles Schwab, Edward Jones, wherever, give this a Google and you'll find this. What a total stock market index fund means is that you are buying tiny, tiny shares of the entire stock market, but you are still getting, it's the entire stock market. So you're still getting tiny parts of Microsoft, Apple, NVIDIA, Amazon, Google, Meta, Berkshire Hathaway, Lilly, like all of these big name companies. And what you do right now, as I'm recording this, it looks like this one for Fidelity is $146 per share, which means that you can go in and literally buy an entire share for $146. So that is the second step of your IRA, is going and hitting buy and buying shares. Some of them, depending on which index fund you get into, some of them will have a minimum to start 500, 1,000, 2,000. So you might have to pile up money for a little bit, depending on which one you choose, if it has a minimum to start. Most of the time after you start, there's not a minimum to buy shares later. So even if it's like $1,000 to start that account, you just let your money pile up. You can go ahead, transfer it over to Fidelity or wherever you choose and let it kind of pile up there. That way it doesn't get spent, of course. And when it does get enough to do that initial first buy, go ahead, buy it. The thing I like about Fidelity, and I haven't, correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't found, I didn't find this with Vanguard, where you can automate on Fidelity doing both steps of the process. You can automate the first step, pulling it out of your checking account, and you can also automate the second step where it will go and literally buy the shares for you. You can automate both. Also, most of the time, you're going to be able to buy partial shares. So, say you only have $50 to invest, that's all you can afford this month. That's okay. It'll let you buy, a micro share. You don't have to buy the entire share at $146, especially after your account is already open. Like I said, some of them will have like kind of initial amounts to start with. So I hope that was a little bit helpful, but it really is not that scary. Just start clicking around, doing some research, Googling some things. Like I said, The Simple Path to Wealth is a really great starter book. At least get your feet wet and your foot in the door, all the metaphors about feet, and start learning a little bit about investing and investing $100 here and there, and it will start to add up. The good thing about these is that you're usually going to get about a 7 to 10% return on your investment. I usually, when I'm calculating our retirement numbers, I will usually put 8% in as our return. Of course, some of that is going to go to inflation, like I said, over time, but that gives you plenty. Also, just kind of side note, usually the good rule of thumb, and he does talk about this more in The Simple Path to Wealth. A good rule of thumb is once you have $1 million invested, you should be able to pull roughly $40,000 a year to live on. And your investment should replenish itself, meaning that it should earn another 40,000 in the following year. Then again, you can pull out 40,000 and it should keep replenishing itself at that rate. So that's kind of the rule of thumb. So if you want 40,000 a year to live on, you need $1 million invested. If you need 60,000 a year to live on, you need $1.5 million. 2 million would give you roughly 80,000 a year to live on. And those numbers are kind of, they do have inflation plugged into them. They do have that average of like a 7 to 10% return. These are just kind of rules of thumb. It's not an exact amount, of course, because the market is going to fluctuate, but that's just kind of a good rule of thumb. So usually I tell my clients to aim for 1 to 3 million is what the average American kind of needs to put as their target. Of course, because some of us do have pensions, like it's kind of a dying trend, but there are pensions where some people are going to supplement with that. Some people want to maybe do work part-time or still have like a hobby turned job, so they don't want to completely retire. Other people will have Social Security, or maybe they have a partner and each of you has $1 million portfolio, put it together like, oh, that's pretty decent, right? So that's just kind of a rough rule of thumb. You don't need tens of millions of dollars to invest. If you invest in long term, that means slow and steady. It's going to sit there for 10 to 40 years, right? And we want these low cost index funds. What that means is this fund, and if you Google this Fidelity Total Market Index Fund, it will show you that the expenses are low on a scale of 1 to 5. Sorry, it's a 1. What this is it's the entire stock market. So they're not managing it. There's not an advisor in there buying and selling and changing what things are, right? Because it is just tiny shares of the entire stock market. So it's very simple. The fees are very low. You're getting the risk factor is average because you're getting the high risk and you're getting the low risk. So the risk is going to be somewhere in the middle. It's going to average out. Anyway, that was a very long tip 3, but that is the most important thing. If I could tell you anything, that is the most important thing. And I will preach that from the rooftops all day long about how important investing is and how that is the key to true wealth building. All right. Number 4 is frugal shopping around. Okay. We know this. We hear this tip all the time, but it's not, it's always worth repeating. is making sure this is the time is if you're really feeling the pinch in your grocery budget, this is the time where maybe we go to multiple stores to shop the deals. I know it takes a little bit of extra time, but sometimes if our budget is that tight, that's what we have to do. This is where maybe we got to, pick up a little couponing. There are so many coupons online. There are so many, like for us, we have Kroger here, and Kroger does great store coupons. They also do a rewards membership where you can save money with the card. You can get discounts on your gas. That was huge for me when I was in the very beginning of paying off my debt. I would definitely meal plan around what the coupons were and what the sale items were. Another great tip, which one of my favorite things to do, is scheduling grocery pickups rather than running in the store. First of all, it cuts back on your impulse shopping. And second of all, you can see the total as it's adding up. And so you start to get over your budget, then you go back and you cut a couple things out until you get to whatever your grocery budget was. So you're not like getting a surprise when you get up to pay for your items. So like I said, shopping at different stores, shopping around, couponing. Another huge thing is meal prepping, meal planning, and cutting back waste wherever possible. This is a big one for me. I always joke and say that it's against my religion to throw food away. I will eat leftovers. I will take to-go boxes from restaurants. I don't care. My kids, on the other hand, they ate that yesterday. They're bored of it, right? So I feel like I'm constantly like pulling their legs to get them to like finish whatever leftovers they had. Literally last night we had this conversation. Mama, what's for dinner? We have leftovers. Eat what's in the fridge, because if we don't eat it, it's going to get thrown away. And that is essentially money. So what I've tried to get better as is like making just chicken. And then the chicken can be used for 3 or 4 different dishes. So it doesn't go to waste. Right. The same thing with, I don't know. There's so many different things that you could do this with. I do the same thing with like taco meat. We can make burritos. We can make taco salads. We can make tacos. We can do all these different things with like one source of protein. So trying to reduce waste, trying to meal prep, trying to think through, hey, I could make this one source of protein and turn it into 3 different meals, cutting back on waste, meal prepping, being prepared, all those different things. So maybe this is just for a short season. Maybe you're just hustling to pay off debt or get your emergency fund built up, and you just do this for a short season because it is a lot of work. And I know I'm like adding one more thing to your mental to-do list, but it can be really beneficial for a short season. Last on the list is to cut back on discretionary spending, of course. With the cost of living increasing, you may have to sacrifice other things to stay within your means, work towards your goals, building your savings, investing, things like that. And so we're like, I had to cut back somewhere. So this could be cutting back on your fun money. We already said about groceries, of course. This could be staying out of restaurants a little bit more, getting up and going to pick up your food instead of door dashing it, because it will save a little bit of money. Different things like that. Prepping your coffee at home so you don't, I know there's so many cliches that people are like, don't get lattes but I know it is very little, but it does add up and it does help. Obviously, we don't want you to cut all fun and all joy. We don't want you to have scorched earth, hate your life kind of budgeting. That's not the goal, but there are some places that we can cut back. Also, I feel like we value our treats and our fun money spending when it's done more intentionally. And when it's more of like, all right, this is the treat I get for the week, better enjoy it, right? So it's not as mindless. So it's a little more intentional. It's not happening all the time. We're not, completely spoiled where we're like, well, I got a treat every single day. And then you don't appreciate it as much. So it is kind of cutting back wherever you can and realizing that $5 or $10 does add up. Make sure you are budgeting in a few fun things here and there, but try to be as frugal and cheap as you possibly can. Looking for free activities or activities within nature or hosting events at your house, things like that you can do while you are kind of feeling this pinch, especially over the summer, because there's so many events happening. Maybe our kids are home more, or maybe we're out and about doing more. So we're more tempted to pick up Chick-fil-A at lunch instead of packing sandwiches and things like that. So just trying to be aware and be intentional and give yourself a short amount of time of say, I'm doing this, I'm hyper focusing on groceries for 3 months. Okay. Remind yourself that you don't have to do this forever. Let's just do this for 3 months and see how much money we can put aside in the emergency fund. Or let's do this for 6 months to try to hustle to get that credit card paid off or whatever we need. So put a deadline on it so you can also remind yourself it's not going to be like this forever. And a lot of us, we can hustle when we can see the finish line. So give yourself some sort of finish line. Make sure to reward yourself with some kind of gold star, whatever you need after you hit that goal. And hopefully some of these tips will add up to helping you beat inflation. All right. So those are all of my tips. That is all for me today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in for this season. I appreciate you guys so much. Again, if you find yourself missing the podcast over the summer break, make sure to go back and listen to the old episodes. They might be old, but they're still good. And there is a lot of great info in there, a lot of amazing interviews that I've done over the years, introduce you to some new voices. Also, me recommending lots of resources and books and things over the years that could be a huge help for you on your journey. Also, if you do want to work one-on-one with me, I will still be accepting applications. Even though I'm on a podcast break, I will not be on a work break. So make sure to pop over to asunnysideuplife.com/coaching to learn how you can apply for coaching, learn a little bit more about the services I offer, jump on a free consultation call. I'd love to chat with you and see if I can help you achieve your financial goals. All right, that is all for me this week. I hope you guys enjoy your summer, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye, guys.
Thanks for hanging out for another episode of a Sunny Side Up Life podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and leave a review. 5-star reviews are what help the podcast grow. Don't forget to check out the episode show notes for links to everything that we talked about in today's episode. And if you want to access all of my free resources or you want to learn how to work with me one-on-one, head over to asunnysideuplife.com to get started. And if you want to keep up with me in the day-to-day, don't forget to follow me on social media at A Sunny Side Up Life. Well, that's all for me this week. Bye, guys.